Okay, looks like the recording is on. I think everyone in this group knows each other already, just glancing down the list. Does anybody feel a strong need to reintroduce themselves, or does anybody just think we should do a quick set of intros before we kick off? Going once, going twice. Okay, I think we have rough consensus. So yeah, great to see so many familiar faces. Thank you everyone for making time to join the call today. I guess I'll just work down the agenda as usual. I posted the link to it a moment ago. So the next item is what happened over the past week. Let's see, so some of the usual things happened. So the recording of the last call was shared. Sorry, before I go further, Jason, are you able to take notes to help out with that today again?
Yeah, I'm already typing it up, so just keep going at it. I've got you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I tried to do it myself last time, and because I was talking so much, I'm not good at typing notes and talking at the same time. So I appreciate that very much, Jason.
No problem at all.
I will make sure to cover anything you say. Cool. So yeah, so of course the video and the notes for last week's call went up on Thursday last week. Jason, thank you again for your help with that. The weekly update went out also on Thursday last week. Thank you to people who took a look at that and shared comments on it. From my side, so the stakeholder interviews, the one-on-one interviews have continued. Of course, I interviewed many of the people who are on this call. So thank you so much to all of you who made time for those. I think I've done 8 as of today. I have to double check. And I am in the process now of cleaning up those notes and having the interviewee review them before they go out to the public. But the first couple of those are done, and maybe we can discuss how that should happen. So I'll add a quick agenda item, but I want to save that for after the updates part. And then the other big thing from my side is the survey. So again, thank you. So many of you contributed by taking the survey, by providing feedback on the survey. Jason, your detailed feedback in the forum was very, very helpful. I've factored in a lot of that into the version of the survey that's live right now. And so again, there's a bullet point here later in this call to talk in more detail about the survey and about next steps, but I just wanted to share that as an update. I think that's it from my side. Does anyone else want to give an update or jump in and do a stand-up?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in real quick. We've got some community health files and everything with GitHub is just starting to get a little more organized. We're starting to have readmes in all the right places. So I definitely encourage everybody to make sure you're watching and following the outlets, because there's a ton of updates.
Yeah, sorry, there's a little background noise. I think that's Dan. I'm going to just hit the mute button. Cool. Jason, thank you. So yeah, thanks for the work on the resources. Anything more specific you'd like people to contribute to, or any specific types of resources that'd be helpful?
You know, we have some interesting issues going on. So one of them is like about an icon for the StacksGov organization. Another one is just about you know, where we're going to go with some of these different line items. I just think it's a really cool place for people to get more involved, and mostly just want to make sure people are starring it, following it, or getting notifications if they want them.
Cool. Yep, sorry, I'm just taking some notes. I want to make sure we have everything recorded. Very helpful. Thank you, Jason. What's next? What's the next kind of task or a couple tasks on your list?
That's just it. I'm going to continue working with those community health files. I want to see if I can get, you know, just a basic issue template, some of the organizational stuff. And I'm trying to figure out the flow of links. You know, when I go from the forum to GitHub, or when I'm going from GitHub to the forum, I really want that flow to be easy for people, especially for those who might even be less familiar with GitHub in the long run. So I think we've got a good system in place, but we're just learning those little turns and twists as we go along.
Got it. So a good example of this Jason, is like we were talking about, the project board is not immediately visible when you like land on the GitHub repository page, right? So trying to improve the UX, especially as you said, for people who are not as familiar with GitHub, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I put in a few screenshots, like just trying to really redirect people with links and good direction.
Oh, thank you for that. That's great. Does anyone else want to give an update or share what they've been working on? Any blockers or requests they have?
Well, hi everybody. Just to as all is new, is to understand what is going to be the scope of all the impact. So the challenge is to have like a broader view. So I've been studying all the consequences of what we've been doing, but of course I cannot say that I have a conclusion. So, but then I think that it's a good effort that we've been trying to do, and because it's all is new, and a proof of transfer also is something new, and all what we are doing, and so that's something that also we have to understand the scope. There's a lot of literature that we have to dig in, and so that's one of the challenges, that how to cope with all the span of information and knowledge, and also coronavirus in the middle.
Cool, thank you. Do you have any specific asks or specific requests where you think others could help you or help each other, maybe getting on top of literature or the information and knowledge you're talking about?
I keep on this idea of the problems that have been discovered. So then issues in this field of new field of work, and especially is related with technical ways of abusing of the systems. So that's been just to get to know if there's something that we can foresee how to prevent that. That's all. But that's something that probably is not just one person who had to. Everybody, if they're looking for something and then discover there's something that is a challenge or is that taken advantage, that's something maybe we should record or share it. So that's something that we can all be with our eyes looking and detecting.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry. Yeah, that's a good idea. I think there's a lot we can learn both from other governance initiatives within the kind of cryptocurrency blockchain space, as well as, of course, as you said, very broad set of knowledge of many different types of governance. And so tying this back to Jason's point, we have this GitHub repository called Resources, which is sort of a knowledge base, and there's already a bunch of links there that people have shared with some literature and some articles, and maybe we need a required reading section or something, but I urge you to contribute. As you find things, you can throw them into that repository as an issue, and someone will make sure they get added to that knowledge base. Does anyone else have an update or stand up they want to share?
Elaine, should I share that deck now, or you have time later?
I have a slot blocked for that in a couple minutes, so let's hang on to that for just a sec. Thank you.
Yeah, I also have some updates just on foundation formation from Blockstack. This is Brittany. If you want me to go over that now, or can slot that later as well.
I guess in the interest of fairness, let's just stick to the agenda as it stands right now. The order is a little arbitrary, but I think it's helpful for people to kind of, to kind of know what order things are happening in, and people can kind of go onto that GitHub issue and kind of propose that we change the order of stuff. Yeah, so Brittany, if it's okay with you, just give us a couple minutes.
Yeah, I see it down here. Yeah, after Dan. Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, thank you for offering. That's really helpful. I'm excited to hear your update. Does anyone else want to jump in with a stand-up update? Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you for those who shared updates. let's keep moving. So the next thing in the agenda is the community survey. By the way, I'm cognizant of the fact that the updates I wanted to share ended up higher on the agenda than other items, and I apologize for that. I will be more cognizant of that going forward, and maybe we can have multiple people put these agendas together, but I think we'll have plenty of time to get through everything today, so it should not be an issue. So apologies for that. The community survey, again, thank you to those who've taken it, shared updates already. Yeah, I don't know. Brittany, you and I had discussed sort of next steps, and I guess Jenny was part of this conversation as well. How do people feel? Is this ready to go out? I mean, there are definitely some small things that still could be changed, like the suggestions that Jason made most recently, but how do people feel about that?
I think that this is ready to go. Because this will bring us some new knowledge or understanding, and probably we have to dig in some special themes or subjects, and so then it's better to start doing something, and then we gain time for that.
Cool, Philip, thank you for sharing that. What do other people think?
I'll just throw my quick 2 cents in that aside from the points I made in that forum post, I think it's ready to go.
Does anybody feel that it's too long or too short, or is it kind of the right length?
The
it was
first
fine.
one was a bit long, but the second one that was a bit more, well, probably because I gained some experience on it, but then it was not so long at the end, because I don't know what did you do, but you got some questions, or you put it in a different way. I don't know. It was different.
Thank you. Juliet, did I see you unmute there for a second? Did you want to ask something or suggest something?
No, I was just commenting on what Philip said, that I agreed with what he had to say, that it was time to put it out there, that it's ready to go now. I don't think it is a little long, but I think that I think we've all been through it, and it's not egregiously long. I think that it's time to put it out there and see what we can learn from the community.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I guess there's one other burning question on my mind, which is just, what does success look like? Is there some minimum number of responses we want to see? Another question related to this is like, what do we do with the results? And I guess we don't have results yet, so maybe we could save the second question for a later call. I guess we have consensus on just, let's just do it, which is perfectly okay by me.
But from the team here now, we have 9 people or 10, I don't know, 6, 9. So have you got at least 9?
Last time when I checked yesterday, there were 7 responses. I know at least 1 or 2 have come in. So I think that roughly this group of people has answered it so far. Yeah, so almost everyone, or maybe everyone, has answered it here.
So if we get 3 times our number, probably there will increase at least the scope of information, and then so 30 people or 27 people, and that will be compared with the 180 people. I don't know what's the number of people that could answer, but that's something. Or maybe we can separate in 2 parts. I don't know, but
yeah, that's actually a good question. That's something I thought about doing. Do we want to basically clone the survey and then record fresh answers once it goes to a broader audience, or do we think that there's no reason to do that?
I think the answers from our group still stand, unless people feel like they want to go through it again. But I was happy to, you know, actually contribute my answers, and then I'm looking forward to seeing that alongside just whatever subset of the larger group we're sending it out to.
Makes sense.
Are the partial answers being registered? So if somebody doesn't finish the whole survey, is that recorded at least?
It is, yes.
Oh, good.
So yeah, another question is how to share the results, and there's, you know, I can print out a report directly using Typeform, or we can direct the answers into a Google Sheet, and then we can make that Google Sheet public. There's different ways we can do that. We'll definitely share the raw data so people can draw their own conclusions. Okay, in the interest of time, I think we should probably move on. So it sounds like next steps are pretty clear here. I will finish factoring in the outstanding feedback from Jason, for example. Brittany, Jenny, anyone else, do you guys want to share any specifics on like how this should be shared with the world? Or maybe we could do that asynchronously.
We can do that asynchronously, but let's talk a little bit about our strategy for distribution after this initial phase of sharing.
Sure, yeah, so by initial phase of sharing, you mean all of us just sharing this with our own social networks, or do we have any more specific plans?
Yeah, I'm thinking just to try to, and I think we've discussed this before, just to try to diversify the participants who are currently engaged with it. Still thinking through that, but we can talk about this later.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I agree. Great. Let's keep moving through the agenda. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts on that. I added a moment ago how to share the interview notes. So again, I have these sets of notes from these people that I've interviewed, and thank you to everyone who participated in that. They've been very informative, and I'm really, really, really excited to share those with everyone and let people draw their own conclusions from them. I've already begun to kind of see some patterns and things. The main question I have is just about like anonymity and privacy. You know, like I think people have been very honest and upfront in their answers to these questions. And of course, I want to share the answers anonymously, but the thing is that it would be very easy to de-anonymize a lot of the answers. You know, if someone says, oh, my role in the community is X, it's not that many people. We can probably guess who that person is. Does anyone have any strong thoughts or feelings on how we should do this, whether we should do this, how the answer should be shared, et cetera?
I'm actually interested to see what others think. You know, with a lot of the answers that I provided and looking back over things, I was pretty comfortable with putting that information out there. But I've kind of been giving that a few days to sink in and seeing how I feel about that as I go on. But so far, I think I want to weigh on the side of open wherever I can.
So at least one person I spoke to actually said, oh, I'm perfectly okay if you share my notes with my name attached to them. That's not what I was planning to do, but I guess that is an option. I don't know, Jason, do you or anyone else have thoughts on that? Should they be anonymous?
I think that's up to the individual. If you were given authority to put their name on it and they were fine with that, but if others did not want to be identified, then it becomes an issue of should you remove names off of everything and then off of any kind of titles off of things so that it's not clear who the person is.
Yeah, I agree with you, Juliet. And the reason, one of the reasons I'm asking is because as you're suggesting, even if 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people are okay with their names being shared and others are not, then again, there's this process of elimination, right? So removing one person's anonymity can have that effect on everybody. So again, my strong inclination is we'll keep it anonymous unless anyone feels strongly otherwise. And we'll kind of just deal with the fact that in some cases you can maybe guess.
The problem is, well, obviously it has to be anonymous, but you know, the question when you ask, are you one? And then next question is from one, what do you think. And you know, the serial one after another. Some questions are parallel. So probably the way to organize is not all the answers together, only the ones that are serial. I noticed that in participating in all several.
Sorry, Philip, let me interrupt you for just a second. I think if I understand what you're saying correctly, you're talking about the survey still, right? Because I'm talking now about an interview, which is totally separate from that.
Ah, the interviews, sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
I completely,
Yeah, sorry, I transitioned topics there very obviously.
Sorry.
So in case of the survey, no, the results will be shared in an aggregate fashion. It will be completely anonymous. I'm not worried about anonymity for the survey. It's more just the interviews because they're much more detailed and there's fewer of them. Cool, okay, it sounds like we have rough consensus on a path forward for sharing those, so I will continue to work on that. I think we can begin releasing the first ones this week because there's at least one or two that are ready to go, and hopefully most of them by next week. Okay. The next topic I have is the preliminary governance proposal, which is one of my major deliverables to PBC, but also to the community. I have a very rough draft of this, which I have shared with Brittany so far, and I'd like to share with the whole community, and I think we could do that soon. I don't know, Brittany, have you had a chance to look at that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Coming off of mute here. Yeah, I think the governance proposal, we're just circulating with a few internal members at PBC. I think so far it looks very good. I think it's very comprehensive. So I think it's something that we'll be able to share with the community probably, we could share it sooner and get feedback. I think if you wanted us to do a pass by the end of today, I shared it with some other team members just to get their thoughts. I think the overwhelming opinion is like, it's very good, it's very comprehensive. We may have the opportunity to pare it down, the proposal, because there is like a lot of background information that is about the general community and kind of where we are today. But in terms of the proposal that may be lasting and ongoing, it may be, I think, like the second half of the proposal you made. So thanks for all the work on that. But I'm comfortable if you want to share it more broadly now, or if you want to just get some initial feedback, tweak it, and then we can share it with this governance group. I think that may be a great step.
Cool. Thank you for sharing those thoughts, Brittany. Yeah. So sorry for context. I know I kind of brought this out of the blue. The exact shape of this is still being figured out. And as Brittany suggested a moment ago, it's kind of like I erred on the side of just being very inclusive. And so one of the things I do is I talk about kind of challenges in governance of blockchain networks in general, which is not at all Blockstack specific. And then a later piece of this proposal talks about some specific ideas for how we might want to govern something like a foundation, as well as just governance of the entire ecosystem, and kind of, do we want different, branches of governance, and do we want checks and balances and all this kind of stuff. So I agree with Brittany. I think it's a little messy right now. I think it's close to a place where it's cohesive enough that we could share it with the community to get feedback. And so, I'm excited to share that with everyone and get everyone's thoughts on that. So we'll do that as soon as we possibly can, hopefully still this week. And it's a bit of a brain dump from my brain, and it definitely factors in a lot of the things that I've heard and learned from these calls and from the working group and from the surveys, preliminary results in the survey, as well as the interviews. So I hope that when people look over it, they will agree with me that like their input has fed into this. And of course, this is, there will be ample opportunity for people to weigh in and debate finer points of it and propose changes and things like that. So I'm very excited about that process. That's kind of the next phase, I think, in the governance initiative from my perspective. Any thoughts or questions on that?
Just excited to see it.
Cool.
Thanks, Lee.
Brittany, you good?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, cool. Okay, great. So next up is Dan showing us a presentation on some open questions about governance. I'm just quickly glancing at the agenda. We have an update from Brittany after that. Yeah, Dan, do you think 10 minutes is enough?
I think that's plenty.
All right, take it away and feel free to share your screen.
Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we're good. Yep.
That's good.
So a couple of weeks ago, I think I had a bunch of questions, and I was trying to understand, I think, kind of where we are, where we're going, and I basically decided to put this together to kind of help me understand, and hoping actually that this can be used maybe for the wider community to kind of help people get a kind of simple view, a more consumable view of what the governance working group is doing, how they can participate, things like that. So there's nothing specifically new here. I've pulled information in from Brittany's forum post, from some of these meetings. Juliet's contributed some questions and stuff that I added on here. I think long term, I'm going to yank the questions out because really the focus that I wanted to have for this is just kind of what's the state of governance, what is PBC doing, what does the community need to do, and then kind of what that looks like at the end, and how that's going to work together a little bit. So this is not done, and I'll just go through it. So feel free to interrupt if you have questions. It's fairly straightforward and short here. So kind of setting the goal, setting the base here. It's really a document to give everybody an understanding of where we are, what we're doing. And also, if anybody call out anything I have wrong here, because this is, like I said, a work in progress. So Blockstack PBC is laying the groundwork for governance. I've called out that they've identified Singapore as a location for the Stacks Foundation, and added some other stuff here: appointment of an interim director and creation of the legal entity. I don't know if that's stuff true. This is a placeholder for now. So I will update it based on what we learn. And the timeline I put below is just a placeholder for now. I talked to Lane briefly, and I think there's some more concrete dates we can stick in here. But the idea here is really to kind of identify what PBC is doing, what their time frame is, so that somebody can get a simple view without having to go to a forum post, a GitHub, and stuff like that. And again, directly from the forum post, just talking about what the foundation might be, based again on Brittany's forum post. The foundation isn't for fundraising, it's for the community and independent of PBC. And then questions coming out of that same forum post, right? So these are the same questions that we talked about, I guess, the past couple of weeks. Nothing new here, but we can definitely, I think, pull these out and just kind of keep pointers to them. And then on the community side, the Blockstack community's involvement is really to decide on many of the governance factors. And I wanted to call it that we have ongoing discussions and we need input. And this is just a regurgitation at the bottom of existing links to existing resources that we're using. Again, the timeline is just a placeholder for now. I want to get that solidified and updated with real timelines. But basically, the idea here is to kind of let people know, kind of give them a simple view of, like, here's what we're doing. We're giving input into the foundation, creation, organization, etc. And then after foundation creation, we're going to have an ongoing governance input via some method. Not really identifying what that is yet, right? So that's kind of it. The rest of this is just kind of questions raised by the community, questions raised by myself, some of the things that we talked about in the past. I think the key for me, again, is really this slide deck, what the community is doing, what our timeline is, and maybe build out a little bit here what specific things we need to talk about. And then also kind of PVC's role, right? So what is PVC doing? What have they done? And then what the timeline is for that. So that's kind of it. That's where I'm going. Feedback, questions, anything?
I like the idea of a visual consumable by the community so that they can see there's, it's friendly, it's easy to understand, then having the dates when you get the dates in there, and maybe a little more information. So later on, as we start to surface these different things, these different questions that we have, and start to looking at what the principles of governance are for this community.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, thank you for that. I think there's definitely some key questions that we might want to add here, like some foundational pieces to make sure that everybody's on the same page about really kind of like what the Stacks Foundation is and how it's going to work. Some of the more kind of detailed questions I think should be out of this deck. But yeah, thanks. Like I said, I needed this for myself, and I think it's something more consumable for the general community.
The why is why we need this foundation probably is something that one wonders. So probably that's something that we probably have to put. And are you thinking of probably mention the survey there as a way to have feedback on the ideas?
Yeah, that's a great point. I was thinking about that too. I didn't call out kind of Lane's role in this and as kind of the recommendation for or whatever recommendations he's providing, and then the community feedback that's going into that too. But your point about like why the foundation, I think that's kind of what was one of the things that was driving me to kind of put this together, because I think there's that foundational question of is a foundation the right piece? Is it the right organization, and why do we need it? That question is out there, and yet we already have a process that's ongoing by PVC to set up a foundation, right? And that was one of the kind of disconnects that drove me to kind of create this, and I want to make sure that this is out there.
Thanks, Dan. It's really helpful.
Yeah, this is really nice. Thanks for putting this together.
And Dan, we'll definitely, if it's okay with you, I'd love to add the actual slides to the resources repository, so they're part of our eternal knowledge base.
I want to slap a draft over the dates or something so that it's not, nobody thinks this is accurate. But yeah, definitely, cool. I'll send it.
Well, it can be a living document, right? We can update it as we have more information on the dates as well.
That's fine. Yeah. Right now it's hosted on slides.com, so it's just like a PDF export and HTML. But
yeah, or we could just link directly to it there if you want to leave it there. That's okay too.
Okay, cool.
All right. Yeah. Thank you again. It's really helpful. Let's go to Brittany for her update. Thanks for being patient, Brittany.
Great. Yeah, no problem. First, when I glanced at the agenda, I missed where it was at. But yeah, I know last week there were a number of questions from the foundation about the foundation from the call. So I can write some of these things up. But, I think because I work at Blockstack PVC, I must say, like, there always has to be a disclaimer that, these things are work in progress, so they aren't definitive. This is not, tradable information, all of that. So that's why the the slowness in response is not because we aren't doing work behind the scenes. It's just because I need more legal sign off than other members of the working group to be able to publish anything with you guys. So I'm happy to give you kind of a high level overview and answer any questions about the foundation. But I will just go through the list of questions that are included in the GitHub. So I will put that in chat if anyone wants to follow along.
Yeah, and for context, I did my best to compile this list of questions. A lot of them were questions that came from Dan on the last call, but also, of course, other people asked questions. And if I missed any, then I apologize, but feel free to throw them in as well. I'm sure Brittany would be happy to discuss them.
Yeah. So hopefully this won't take longer. I'm looking at 10:42, so maybe the next 8 minutes I can just go through a number of these items, and then if we have more questions or if we want to keep those once there's more in writing, we can do that as well. So high level, why do we want a foundation? Who is choosing this foundation? So the path forward is that in order for Blockstack to be considered decentralized, that means that no single person or entity is kind of controlling the network. And right now, Blockstack PBC is the biggest contributor to the Blockstack ecosystem, so can be seen as a very centralized source of reliance that if Blockstack PBC went away, the network may not continue to exist. So with the framing in mind of making the ecosystem more robust and resilient and also more decentralized, the plan is to spin out another entity that takes on some of the responsibilities that PBC has been doing to date. Those things include working on governance of the blockchain itself. So, how will decisions be made in the future? Right now, that's using our SIP proposals, which are stacks improvement proposals. Currently, those SIPs are accepted via Blockstack PBC engineers by and large. So that responsibility will move into this new entity. The program around app mining, which provides rewards out to the ecosystem for developing on the blockchain, that will also be part of this new entity, so that those rewards will continue to be distributed, and the system in which to do that will be distributed, but that will live outside of the PBC entity. And then as we increase the capacity for miners and stacking and different stakeholders in the ecosystem who are important to the security of the ecosystem, those will also be sort of supported through not just PBC, but other entities in the ecosystem. So looking at those different activities that we would want to help support the ecosystem, our legal team has looked at sort of different structures. A nonprofit structure is the most common in blockchain projects. This is because it helps alleviate some of the responsibility to try and generate profit off of an ecosystem. So nonprofit is set up in order to support the ecosystem without trying to be rent seeking or kind of controlling the network. So we landed on that being a very reasonable path why we would choose a nonprofit. Now, when you get into nonprofits, there are multiple jurisdictions which are very friendly to blockchain ecosystems. So that's based on precedent. We've seen this in other projects, and those jurisdictions usually are Singapore, the United States, and Switzerland. So in Switzerland, it's called an association, and the US, it's called a nonprofit or a not-for-profit. And then in Singapore, it's called a foundation. So across those three, we looked at the different requirements, which are all fairly similar, but the jurisdictions, require different members to be locally oriented. So they may need board of directors to be locally in those jurisdictions. For example, Switzerland requires that, as well as Singapore and the US. As many people know, the Blockstack has a number of employees in the US. So that was something we considered. We don't have any key stakeholders or large key stakeholders in Switzerland, so that kind of ruled out an association there. But we do have a number of active stakeholders in the Asia region, especially in Singapore. So those two are the, jurisdictions in which we would be able to help create this entity. And we've been leaning towards the Singapore Foundation because it has a number of structural advantages for a global ecosystem like this. So there are different requirements around board of directors and members of the foundation and how those things can be set up. So that was kind of the path we took to land on a Singapore-based foundation. And that foundation, the formation process can take as little as 7 days, but it can take as long as 2 months because of the approval process in Singapore. So we're mindful of that on the PBC side, and we've just been exploring how to weigh those different timelines because we don't know if we register and it ends up taking 2 months. That's kind of out of our control, but it's something we would rather have in place sooner rather than later. So that's kind of the structural pieces in which we've been thinking about. Now, within this foundation, as I mentioned, there are board members. This is where we've been thinking about governance, but there are some advantages the way that the Singapore Foundation is structured, which is once we incorporate the entity, which will require at least one board member. I think we're planning right now, our kind of rough thoughts is since I will be heading up the foundation, I will be the first board member, and then a local Singapore partner that we have that is active in the Stacks ecosystem will likely be the second, a board of directors. Now from there, those are required in order to set up the entity, but that creates room that we can add additional board members after the entity has been set up. So that will give us a little more time to implement some of these governance changes, getting community feedback, nominating different members of the community who can help weigh in on that process, which I think may, I'm kind of thinking may be a better solution than waiting till we have a fully developed board to begin the incorporation process, just because it may take a large amount of time. So some of the research I've been doing on my end is talking to a lot of other foundations that exist in this space that have similar structures. There is a strong recommendation around an MVP governance, which means that there's very clear paths to how governance can be decided and the intention of what that governance will serve. But everything may not be fully baked when the foundation is started because we just can't anticipate all of the different needs yet. So the bare basics of making sure that we can represent the community, that we can represent these different stakeholders is key step number one. And then once those are set up and kind of tested, we can add more things to it. So that's where I see this process not being a short-term, 2-month process of figuring out all the governance and then shipping it, but actually an evolving process in which we have, the minimum in place and then being able to enhance it and add to it, especially as new things come up. Like I know a number of these, the members of this call are aware of app mining. This is a question mark of how this will look in the future. That's something that I think will require some governance and a lot of input. So we might not be able to have an exact answer in the next 2 weeks around that, but that's something that we would love to have a path to figure out together as the foundation. So I think, I know I'm about 8 minutes here, so maybe 1 more minute, just trying to hit a few of these other questions, and then I'm happy to take questions. But, I think kind of skipping down to how it will be funded, the initial thought is that Blockstack PBC will either create like a very favorable loan to the foundation, or will start with an initial donation into the foundation in order to get operations set up and running. They're longer term, there are options because this foundation will take over a portion of the treasury of Stacks tokens that may be participating in stacking and using Bitcoin that is provided there as a way to fund ongoing operations. Could be another aspect to it. But looking at other peers in the space, many either set up with a donation structure or with the loan structure. So those we haven't quite decided on yet. Part of that is just deciding from PBC how that will work structurally, financially, tax-wise, and that's where we're getting input from the experts. Yeah, and then I think some of this other stuff about the organizing, managing development work, tech standards, data structures, all these, that's where I see that we can have a more robust conversation in the interim term, but maybe we don't have all those answers right away. So I will pause there. I know that was a lot of information. So happy to jump in if there are any immediate questions around sort of structure, jurisdiction, and the short term kind of rollout of this.
I have a question. You mentioned a partner that is already in Singapore. So obviously you have somebody in mind. Or is there a reason you're not naming that person or entity? Actually, I have several questions. Another question is there already a defined organizational structure for what the foundation board would look like? Have you already talked about terms? Have you talked about how the community would have input into a nomination or approval process for those folks? Have you talked about what the decision-making process is going to look like with this board and or director? It sounds like you guys have a plan, and I think that's kind of where my disconnect is coming from. It's like we haven't seen that plan. Like you guys have done a lot of work, and I think all of us here have a huge amount of trust in PBC, but I think there's a missing piece of transparency here, because I know you're talking about this stuff, but there's a lot of stuff going on that at least I didn't know about. And I'd like to kind of see you guys have a plan somewhere. What's the plan?
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, and I think as I mentioned, part of the behind the scenes planning was just around legally, if we're making any announcements, because we're a publicly traded token, we have to be very mindful of people being able to trade on that information or possibly take it as signal. So that's why the communication that some of this plan that I'm communicating here is going to be put in writing, but it needs to be legally reviewed as well. So it's not our intention to not be transparent. It's just we've had to walk a little bit of that fine line between, okay, we want to be as transparent as possible and not lock in any decisions in advance, but also mindful that we need to kind of have a more structure around, a plan to see what's even feasible given just how our entity is structured, because of our SEC approval, because of these, sort of legal requirements. So yeah, I think for me, it's balancing that, but I think now we're at a point where I'm able to communicate these things with kind of the intention that everything may not be, or one, everything is definitely not decided, but two, that structurally none of this has gone into place yet, and no one should count on this information as truth just yet until it is actually confirmed. So so the partner in Singapore, because there is no formal paperwork of that partner coming on board, that's why I'm not comfortable disclosing who they are yet. I think that some of the other questions you asked of how does this process work, how does the board work? We have collected some basic governance structures of boards, which have very generous ways in which to remove anyone from a board and also to add people to the board. But that's where we want that kind of MVP governance, so that we feel comfortable that, one, if we ramp things up and things need to change, that is feasible, but also knowing that we may not be able to get it perfect on launch, or it may take a lot of time to do that. So we want to be able to have that time without being restricted by some external time constraints. So I know these answers feel very political as I'm saying them, so I don't mean to kind of shy away from being direct. Like I said, because I'm a Blockstack PBC employee, this is necessary. Part of this process is that once the foundation is set up, I will no longer be an employee at Blockstack PBC. I will be employed by the foundation, which will be independent, which means I will have a different way of operating in this group and within the community than I am now, because I'm currently helping spin up the structure, but I'm not actually, I'm still working for PBC. So there's like a little bit of blurry line there. So that's why there is encouragement to actually help get the entity set up, so some of these things can be taken out of PBC. And since we have no formal entity and no formal people working for that entity, that's where there's a little bit of this kind of overlap that I have to be super mindful of.
Brittany, thank you so much. I just want to jump in really quickly and do a time check, because I know we're coming to the top of the hour now. Brittany, do you have any extra time? Are you able to stick around and answer more questions? And if not, then I'm sure we could schedule an AMA or something later to dive more into this. I want to be respectful of your time and everyone else's time.
Sure, I'm happy to hop on in like 10 minutes or so. I might just have to reschedule one call real quick, but thanks for giving me the time.
Cool. Okay, and like Dan, I know you had some good questions, and I'm sure other people have questions as well. But I myself I have another call in a couple of minutes. So just before that happens, so people who are free to stick around, like please feel free. I can hand the host capability to someone else, and the call should continue recording. There's no issues there. But just making sure that we cover all of the critical agenda items within the first hour, and then again, people can stick around and discuss further and ask more questions. I guess I can skip these next two things. Any other updates? I think we've been through most of the important updates and we're short on time. How to get involved? I think everyone in this group knows by now, keep joining these calls, be in the working group, keep an eye on GitHub, et cetera. So just two things at the very bottom of the agenda. So the call length, Jason put forward a proposal to extend this to a 90-minute call. And I guess we're kind of seeing today how that might be useful. A couple of folks suggested in response, maybe we keep the official call at 60 minutes, but kind of like we're doing today, we have a soft closing at the end so people can stick around and discuss further if they want to. Jason, did you want to share any thoughts on that before we end the call?
Yeah, so the main reason I threw that out there is we discussed it a little bit on the last call, and seeing that we do have these kind of longer form discussions that are coming out of it. I think 90 minutes makes sense, but I do want to respect everyone's time as well. So I was curious to really just get everyone's input and see whether we should do 60 or 90. So we've got that over in the GitHub issue, and I can also put a link to that so people can review it.
I beat you to it. I just dropped the link, but please take a look if you haven't. There's some commentary there. Sorry.
Nice.
Sorry, I think I interrupted someone a second ago. Was someone else jumping in on that topic?
Yes, this is Juliet. I was responding to Jason because I think it's a good idea, Jason, and I'm glad that you brought that up. We can always have it for 90 minutes, and then if we don't go the full 90 minutes, but being able to have that additional time, like for example, today, I think there's some key questions that can be asked, even though, we're at this early stage of the Stacks Foundation. I still think there's some questions and some discussion that can be had, and perhaps, it might be a good idea to set another call in order to have those discussions, because I don't know how much is going to happen when both you and Brittany have other calls that you have to go to. But the rest of us can sit and talk about, what additional questions we have at this point.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think we could either choose to block more time on the call next week for this topic, or we could schedule a separate call depending on Brittany's and everyone else's availability. Strictly on the question of call length, does anyone else have a strong opinion they want to share right now about kind of officially blocking 60 versus 90 minutes for these calls?
Agree with Juliet.
Okay. I think we do not have total consensus on this because I think a couple people feel that it should be more 60 minutes. Some people feel more 90 minutes. So maybe we can agree to bring this topic up again on the next call. And in the meantime, we can discuss it like on the GitHub issue. The
Then
final,
everyone-
sorry,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
So and everyone who's on the call, if you can post on GitHub what your preference is, that would be great so we can understand, whether it's going to be 60 minutes from now on or go to 90 minutes. Thank you.
Seconded. Yeah, please jump in on that conversation if you haven't yet on GitHub. The link was just shared. And sorry to kind of rush a tiny bit, but the final thing that I wanted to make sure we talked about today is it's not really a discussion, it's more just a request. My own role in governance is evolving and should evolve. And I just wanted to be very clear, like, I am a sort of a steward and I, am working very hard to kind of put things together like the survey and kind of bootstrap governance. But, there's no, how do I put this? I don't ever want to be a bottleneck to anything happening. And I don't, in the same way that PBC should not be a centralizing entity. And if PBC were to go away, Blockstack would continue to function. If, God forbid, I were to go away tomorrow, I want to make sure that kind of governance continues to function. And so in that interest, I would just like to make an open invitation if anyone else wants to do things like hosting these calls in the future or becoming, I don't know what the word for it is, joining the organization on GitHub so they have like merge access, all that kind of thing. This is all meant to be open and permissionless. And so open invitation, anyone in this group, if you're interested in doing those things and helping with more coordination. I know we're all very busy. We have a lot on our plates, but please do step up. And again, thank you to like Jason, who's done a bunch of this already. I really appreciate that. Okay, I think that's it for me, guys. I do have to run, but Jason, can you stick around a little bit longer as well?
Yeah, I have some time. I can stick around.
Okay, I'm going to hand the hosting stuff here to you, Jason. As I said, the call should continue, the recording should continue, and Brittany said she may be able to join again in a couple minutes, so hopefully she'll be able to do that as well.
All right, excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right, so it looks like it let me take over there. We still have a few people on the call. I know we covered a lot of topics. I took a ton of notes just like last time. Is there anything else that we would like to address in this smaller group while we have a little more time?
Can we have a head count of who's in? I guess I can look at that on my app. So
yeah, we've got 5 total with me. So we've got Philip, Dan, and GM. I'm not sure who that is offhand, but happy to have you here.
I'm Mirlo. I'm
Oh,
Mirlo.
great.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
So I think one of the key questions that I have right now is the public participation bit with respect to the. I understand that they're at early stages and they want to create an MVP of the foundation, but I'm interested in how we as the community are making our voices heard and part of the decision-making process. So that's what's really important to me, is that part, that everyone in the community or the people that want to be involved are able to be heard and have their voice be part of the decision-making process, because at this point I don't see that happening. And I understand the SEC issues and the legal issues and all of that. So perhaps things will be different once Brittany becomes head of the foundation, and we won't have as much of these issues about concern about the legal ramifications for Blockstack PBC. So that's what I'm concerned about, community participation. And also, since we now know that app mining is going to be part of this, as well as potential as stacking and other things, there needs to be, I think we need more developers coming in to, I know there's a lot of the developers that are really interested in both the app mining and stacking and all the things that are happening with the SIPs. So obviously we need a little clarity there too, but I think we need to get more people involved, or more people who will express themselves on future governance of these particular areas.
Sorry, it's Stan here. I'm just going to jump in. I 100% agree with the first part, but I think to me, this is kind of two different steps. There's the creation and organization of the foundation, and all of the decisions that are going around that. To me, I see app mining in whatever form it happens, and some of the other pieces that Brittany talked about that the foundation may kind of guide or direct as kind of secondary. And I'm not sure what PBC's timeline or what the foundation timeline might look like. But for instance, I'd rather make sure we understand how the foundation is going to work, how it's going to make decisions, how it's going to, and how we, like you said, how we have input into all of that first. And I see things like, okay, we've got a foundation, we've got a decision-making process, we've got a process for community input. Now let's step back and figure out how app mining v2 is going to work, or let's see how we're going to have governance around core development, or whatever the area is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. This is Brittany. I'm back on. Sorry, I had to hop off for just 5 minutes there. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So sort of first and foremost, I think that the priority is setting up the entity with the structures so that we know that this body can make decisions independently, and also utilizing the process, so how that stuff works. And then exactly as you said, I think some of the secondary things around app mining and supporting the community and grants, or any of those other mechanisms which a lot of foundations in this space take on, I think can only really be strongly considered and kind of weighed out and decided on once we have that sort of independent entity as well. So it's a little bit of the thing that needs to come first is the entity, and then making sure that entity is set up where everyone feels that it's in a good place to be able to evolve with those changing needs as things go forward.
So that still leaves the piece about the community being able to participate in this early foundation MVP, I guess, as it's been called, but the early decision making and how the community is going to be able to contribute to decision making. So that's one question. The other piece about app mining that I brought up, and this is Juliet, by the way, the other piece that I brought up is only because I know that people are not as involved in governance right now as they might be if they understood what going forward, maybe some of the ramifications of the Stacks Foundation. So I'm not saying that we should talk about app mining now, or we should talk about stacking or any of that. I think that's a little bit too early. But what I'm saying is it's important that the community know where things are headed so that we can get more input into governance. And that's my piece.
I think that Brittany's report about what's going on was very valuable, and so we can understand what has been considered. And as it's been said, I agree that No, agree. I'm happy that that we have a way to have more time in order to define the, some detailed governance of how that's going to, everything is going to be done. So then there's no pressure in that sense that we can bring up this MVP foundation, and then from that we keep on working, and also the attitude and is to keep on improving that. So probably in this presentation deck, then you could also add that part, and also the why that also Brittany explained quite well, why we had to bring up this organization of the decentralization. That's also has to be in there in that deck. Sorry about making you work then, but probably that will be very useful in order to have an overview of what's going on. So I think that the attitude that we have is very positive. So that's something very valuable, very important. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah. So just something that I'm planning to do for kind of next steps is I have a draft of a lot of these things that I just covered on this call. So putting that in a format in which everyone here can kind of view it and maybe make comments and weigh in. And I think some of those things are, I kind of explained the path that we're taking, that it's likely going to be a Singapore foundation. If people have strong concerns, for or against that, or want to weigh on that, that may be way less controversial. I think obviously the idea of how the board will operate, how board members will be decided, how they will be added, is more up for debate and input. And so I can kind of put in, where we have the biggest gaps of like unknown, and what things maybe I've learned from other projects that I've been able to speak to, kind of how they've structured it. I will say that I've been talking to folks who sit on the Zcash Foundation board. I'm talking to folks on the Algorand Foundation board, and some other projects boards as a source of information of things that they've learned that maybe we can leverage best practices, members of the, some other foundations that are coming up. So I have a few more of those calls today. So I would love to be able to incorporate those notes into something I can share with you, like end of day today, tomorrow morning, just so it's as comprehensive as possible. And everyone has the same information that I have in terms of what I've kind of learned from the community, and taking that as a next step to get everyone's feedback. So that's my proposal for how we can move forward now that this new information is coming out.
Excellent. So I will just jump on real quick. Thank you, everybody. I was just typing away as we were all talking, and I think a lot of fun things are coming to light at this point. We're starting to have some really good questions and conversations. For action items, like you were saying, Brittany, I have would definitely love to get Dan's slides in some format added to the resources, and then when your notes are ready, we can do the same thing and link those in. Anything else that anybody would like to cover at this time?
I would just ask Brittany, you mentioned that you have some discussions ongoing, and you had some unknowns that you could identify. I think to Juliet's point, could you also identify where the community input is going to come? Is it all of it? Because it doesn't sound like all of it. What decisions is the community going to have input to, and what kind of things do you expect that are just going to happen? And I know that sounds kind of bad. I'm not trying to be accusatory, because like I said earlier, I think everybody here has a ton of trust in PBC in general. It's just kind of, for as much as we can, kind of knowing what we actually can do and what we can spend time on. And also we have a better idea of just what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And yeah, I think it's very valid. Like, where does a community fit in? I think this is something that I've been trying to gather from other projects as well. How do they do this? Because I think, for example, I think that there may be input of, or this is what I've learned from Zcash Foundation, is that they have a number of board members. They decided on those board members. Some of them more centralized. They were already key players that already represented parts of the community in a way that they could then help create that board. And then they added more board members based on profiles that they wanted to fill. And those profiles, like, do they have experience running a foundation? Maybe it's not in the crypto world, but maybe they have deep expertise. They wanted to fill a seat for that. They wanted to fill another seat for someone who has open source experience, so has a really deep set of knowledge around that. So those seats were kind of slotted, and the community had feedback on what those slots should be. So like what types of profiles should be in there. And then from there, members could get, or individuals could get elected to be board observers, and kind of helping to fill those roles based on community nominations. And then they would be observers. And then if the board decided to let them in, then that would be kind of a process, for example. So I would imagine that the process itself, getting feedback on that, the nominations, getting feedback on that, the types of profiles in which we think would be representative could be feedback on that. As you can tell from that example, there was not a direct hey, the community elects one person based on voting, and that voting then puts that person on a board seat. Mainly the feedback is because that can actually be quite complicated and can actually may not be the best outcome, especially if you have nefarious players. Like, how do you prevent bad things? But how do you actually work within a trusted environment in which people are weighing in? There are clear deliverables and there are clear levels of approval that need to take place in order for things to get done without impeding the process. So I think that's kind of like what an MVP governance might be, but that's where I see community being a big aspect of the early board setup. And then as things evolve, like, for example, Zcash Foundation had this thing with Founders Rewards. I think they set up a committee that was not at the board level, but that committee was included representatives from different stakeholders in the community who actively had a vote. And then that vote was then either accepted or not accepted based on majority. And then the board ultimately is making the decision. So it is a little hierarchical, but there's clear transparency on all of the opinions of the different people across varied stakeholders that are able to be represented. But it helps prevent gridlock from happening where everyone feels 50-50 about things and there's no way to move anything forward. So these are some of the things I'm learning and I hope to include in the notes, but maybe just ways that you can be thinking about the role. And I highly recommend, if you haven't taken a look at the Zcash Foundation, they've published a lot of their stuff online. I think that they have very transparent governance. We won't take it just off the shelf the way that they've done it, of course, but I think that they have created a very clear path in which they took, and maybe something similar to what we may adopt. But again, that will be inputted by the community as we do that. But yeah, I know that we're 20 minutes past here too, and I think that there's people taking notes. We can continue this conversation in Discord. Feel free to DM me as well with any questions. I'm happy to keep this conversation line open. And now that I have a bit more information, I'm collecting more information, I can share that with everyone here as well. And thanks for your patience on waiting for me to kind of get over some of these legal hurdles that I've had internally of what I can communicate and what I can't communicate. So.
Thank you very much, Brittany.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, everyone.
Cheerio. Take care.
Hey, bye, guys. Stay safe. Thanks.
Are we done?
Yep, I'm just gonna end the recording here. I haven't been host before, so now I get to tell everybody that publicly.
Welcome.
All right. Hey, thank you guys. Though I got everything noted. I look forward to reviewing more.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice hearing you, Dan.
Thanks. Bye.